Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Jacob Shapiro podcast. Back on the podcast is fan favorite and one of my personal favorites, Kamran Bokhari from the New Lines Institute. I brought Kamran in not just to talk about the Middle East, but specifically to give a Pakistani perspective on what's going on between India and Pakistan. Still have a couple more voices that are going to come on. Last week, I thought something was imminent, and it's still imminent, which tells you that things haven't happened. But Kamran does a good job of giving us a sober perspective on that and some other things happening in the Middle East. We recorded Tuesday, May 6th around 2 p.m. Central. This will be out quick, but if anything happens between now and when you listen to this podcast, that's why. Otherwise, you can email me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, book recommendations, etc. Take care of the people that you love. Cheers and see you out there. All right, Kamran, it is Tuesday, May 6th. It's 2:08 p.m. Central Time. We're not going to sit on this episode very long because I don't know how long this episode's going to stay current with the way things are going. We've got Pakistan and India still threatening each other with war. We've got potential U.S.-Iran negotiations. We've got Israel threatening to basically take over the Gaza Strip. We've got the Houthis sending missiles to Tel Aviv airport and Israel responding. We've got developments in Syria. We've got spicy things, according to you, happening with Turkey and the United States. So no shortage of things to talk about. And you can take it to the wider angle if you want. But we had an Indian analyst on the podcast last week. And I know you're not a Pakistani analyst, but you are Pakistani, or at least come from Pakistan. And if memory serves... Was born there. And if memory serves, family from the Kashmir area. Am I right? Did I remember that correctly?
Yeah, we were one of those. The forefathers lived there for about a century.
Okay, well, there you go. So I at least wanted to start by asking you what your take is on the sudden uptick in, tensions, aggressiveness, potential war between Pakistan and India. And then we can dive into all of these other earthquakes happening throughout our favorite and most stable region of the world. So, but start off by telling me from your point of view, like, what is going on? What happened in Kashmir? Who are the people that are behind this? Is it I've seen some Pakistanis say it's an Indian false flag operation to get the U.S. on their side. I mean, it seems very mysterious. So help us make sense of it all.
Well, let me start from where you left off. The U.S. is already on India's side. So yeah. They don't need to get India. India doesn't need to get the U.S. on their side. And the reason for that is India is part of the bigger strategic objective of the United States when it comes to meeting the challenge of China. India obviously has the role to play in maritime spaces, the Indo-Pacific, but those are sort of like future things. Those are not going to materialize anytime soon, so those are future planning. But well before that, in the current moment where you have a tariff trade war going on and sort of reaching boiling point, the United States wants to reduce exposure and dependency on China when it comes to manufacturing and imports. So the hope is that, or the hope has been, that India would be one of those destinations. And we saw in the last couple of weeks, Apple announce that by 2026, I don't remember if it was the beginning or the end, that they will shift a sizable amount of their manufacturing to India. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen, but I wanted to flag that as an example of the broader dynamics that are happening. From an Indian point of view, this is all great. And just today, the IMF announced that this year, I'm not sure at what point, I didn't read the details, India will overtake Japan as the fourth largest economy of the world. So they're going from 5 to 4, and they're aiming for 3. They know that the jump from replacing China is going to take a long, long time because the variance between the two economies is just so massive. So that's the Indian goal. In other words, India wants to play major league, global level geoeconomics, geotech, geopolitics, however you want to describe it. And it sees the current moment of US-China thing heating up as a moment in which it can assert itself. Now, this is the backdrop in which you have this attack on April 22nd in the Indian-controlled Kashmiri town of Pahalgam. To your listeners, I just want to say I use the word controlled because I also say Pakistani controlled. I just don't want to get into, the semantics of occupation and non-occupation. So control is a neutral word. Anyway, so the attack takes place, and there are a whole lot of suspects. Okay, let's just be honest. Okay, and I was on a Pakistani television show this morning, and knowing how I would be savaged and whatnot, I still took sort of the liberty of sort of trying to explain this. And I said, look, whether it's non-state actors in Pakistan doing it on their own without official sanction, whether it was elements of the Pakistani state running their own little operation in concert with the non-state actors, the Pratsis, the Islamist militants, or whether this was an officially commissioned strike or hit, doesn't matter. The point is the origin of these attacks historically has been from Pakistan. And so this idea of a false flag operation, I get it, why that's the Pakistani narrative. Do I agree with it? No. So the Indians are looking at this and saying, okay, that there are two things that they see. One is that we're trying to play Major League and we're still being sucked into this old rivalry in Pakistan that we are trying to leave behind. That's sort of one perspective in India. But because of nationalism, religious nationalism, and Pakistan has become sort of this emotional thing in India over the years. So, your reason tells you, don't be distracted. Okay. This is going to happen. You're going to do your little thing, but don't make this the focus point or the focal point of your efforts on the foreign policy front, because it could distract you from the bigger goal. And I think this is what the vice president, if I had to guess, probably said, to his, counterparts and people he met in India that, we get it, that this is happening, but do what you have to do, but keep your eye on the ball. This is distraction, and there's much more to be achieved. Look at the current moment, and we know you want it. So I think the American challenge is how to take the Indian imperative and sort of say, okay, we'll do both at the same time. The reason why both cannot happen is because and there's another element to it. The other element is, since 2016, under this Prime Minister Narendra Modi, India moved from sort of this idea that we will threaten military action, but will not cross the border and do, strikes inside Pakistan. Mm-hmm. So you remember, you and I think at the time were at GPF, I think, when the 2016 Special Forces operation was mounted. It was called surgical strikes. Pakistanis denied it. They called it firing across the border. My suspicion is that there were some forces that went across the border, short-lived operation, quick and dirty. You hit and you basically, withdraw, pull back. That set up an expectation that, hey, that's sort of the dividing line between the Indian response to Pakistan-based militant attacks in Kashmir and India proper. And so there's a whole history, and I don't want to get into that. But that was sort of the turning point. And what that did was that, okay, the next time this happens, we have to do something bigger. So if this was like a poke, a pinprick, well, next time it happened bigger. And that's what happened in 2019 when we had the suicide bombing of the paramilitary forces bus in Pulwama in Kashmir. We had the Indians, for the first time since the 1971 war, decide to do airstrikes, and not just in Pakistani-controlled Kashmir, but Pakistan proper, in the town of Balakot, which is in the northwestern province called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the Pashtun-dominated Pashtun majority province. Anyway, so what the Pakistanis did is they retaliated by striking at a brigade headquarters on the Indian side of the line of control. Now, that led to a dogfight. The Pakistanis were able to shoot down a MiG-21. The pilot was captured, we were given tea and sent back home. That was it. So we haven't had anything since 2019 February. And then in 2019 of August, the Indians decided that, you know what? One of the ways to solve this problem is to end the autonomous status of the Kashmir that we're in control of. Mind you, there is the Pakistani controlled Kashmir, and there are good chunks of Kashmir that are Chinese control as well. So this is a complicated battle space. So what they did is the area that they controlled, they basically divided it up. A, they took away the autonomous status of the old state of Jammu and Kashmir. B, they divided it up into two federally administered union territories. One, J&K, the Jammu and Kashmir, the other, Ladakh. Ladakh being ethnically different, religiously different than J&K, which is Muslim majority. Ladakh is also on the Chinese border, not on the Pakistani side of the border. So they did that. That created more tensions between India and Pakistan. Nothing happened. But the Indians thought that they had solved this problem. There was a massive security crackdown, and normalization had begun over the past year or so. There was COVID in between. So all sorts of things were going on. Finally, you think from the point of view of the Modi government, hey, we think we've got a handle on this now. And then this thing happens. And so now the question is, okay, last time you did airstrikes, what are you going to do this time? And there's a public expectation, and there is also that sort of strategic expectation where adversaries lock themselves into a spiral, escalating spiral. So this is why I think we're now more than 12 days past the attack from April 22nd. I say 12 days because the last time this happened, the airstrike that I just mentioned, that was 12 days after the attack. Mm-hmm. So this time we're seeing all sorts of activity. There's missile test firing out in the Arabian Sea. There's Air Force drills taking place in, southwestern part of India near the Pakistani border. Today, there are drills taking place in the desert province or state of Rajasthan. There's a lot of mobilization happening. And plus, there's civil defense drills happening in case the Indians struck and the Pakistanis did strikes on the other side. In other words, I think both sides are preparing for something big. I know I've sort of taken a lot of time, but I just wanted to set the stage.
Thank you for laying out the context, but it leads directly to a question that I don't understand, which is, so what was the motive behind the attack itself? Do you think it was just a couple of randos? Like, is there any reason that Pakistan wants to drag India back in? Like, I don't really understand the motive on Pakistan's side behind wanting to do this now of all times.
You and I are not fans of randomness, so I wouldn't want to go into that. Look, I mean, there's a context here, and this is a context that is not something that I came up with. It's being said in both countries or being talked about. There is this view that the Pakistanis had to come out and retaliate for a number of things that have been happening. And this is just sort of like, think of it as an imperative, and without sort of getting into whether the normative side of things. I'm just looking at it empirical. So what has been happening? The backdrop to this is the Pakistanis believe that the insurgency that is picking up steam in Balochistan, in Western Pakistan, and the Taliban insurgency that also is picking up steam simultaneously, is being backed by Indian intelligence. So that is something, we haven't seen any evidence of that. The Pakistanis have not provided evidence, but they keep talking about it. The Indians have been talking about how they support or should support or would support the Baloch. They don't say they support the TTP. But there is some warming of relationships between India and the Taliban government in Afghanistan. So the Pakistanis use that to say, look, it is through this medium, this channel, that the Indians are actually also fueling the Taliban rebellion as well in the Northwest. On top of that, you've had I would say at least a half a dozen unusual targeted assassinations of militant leaders from various Kashmiri groups on Pakistani soil. And they have been blamed on Indian intelligence. And there's a lot that's written out there for the listeners who want to get deeper into this. So you can just sort of Google or use ChatGPT. But there is enough material out there. This is sort of the logic in which, for those who say that Pakistan had to strike back, these are the sort of the buildup. So the Pakistanis were getting hit, and they needed to sort of basically say, "Hey, if you hurt us in this area, then we can hurt you here, knock it off, or whatever." And so there is that narrative that's floating out there. Now, is it true? What is the evidence? Well, no, this is in the realm of sort of speculation, or inferring based on rumor intelligence, if you will. So beyond that, I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, why? So there's another thing that I want to mention is in 2021, then Army Chief, this was when Imran Khan was Prime Minister, then Army Chief General Kamran Bokhari sort of said, "Hey, we want to end this nonsense with India. We have to deal with our western flank." This was well before the Taliban took over Afghanistan and the U.S. withdrew. They were seeing that coming, and they said, "Hey, we don't have any interest in firing up anything with India. Let's just keep it cool there, so we can focus on the western flank." So he went out and he established a ceasefire on the line of control in early 2021. It held. He also tried to improve relations. There were discussions or at least there were reports that, perhaps the Prime Minister of India could come on a visit to Pakistan. But the government of Prime Minister Imran Khan did not want any part of it, so they quashed it, and that thing didn't go anywhere. But the ceasefire held, and so from the Pakistani point of view, they say, "Hey, we haven't done anything, and we have no interest. We have problems. We have an economic financial meltdown. We have political instability of unprecedented proportions, so on and so forth. And so we have no reason to do this." But there is this backdrop that we need to factor in, which is the targeted assassination of multiple militant leaders on Pakistani soil, and the latest incident, which was the hijacking of a train by Baloch rebels that was carrying troops and their families from one part of Balochistan together. It was called the Jafar Express, and there was a hostage situation. There were lots of casualties and fatalities, and that happened only a few months ago. And so after that, the Pakistani state came out and said, "Hey," and this is from the official spokesperson of the military, that we're going to change the rules of the game. So a lot of people cite that and say, well, this is what they meant by changing the rules of the game, is that they are going back to this militancy in Kashmir, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sort of makes sense. Well, so before we get into regional context and how this connects to the big web of things that are happening everywhere else, what do you think is going to happen next? Do you think this is going to be a relatively contained escalation and that India will just do what it has to do in order to try and reestablish some level of deterrence? Are you concerned about a bigger conflagration, like on the level of previous, even India-Pakistan wars are relatively small compared to most wars, but are we talking about one of the three wars that have happened sort of in recent history? Like how worried are you about what's going to happen next?
I think that it all depends on what kind of kinetic action the Indians take. as I said earlier, they've locked themselves into a situation where they can't do what they did last time. So you go back to your point about deterrence. Well, deterrence was established, but then it fell apart. So how you reestablish deterrence? Well, logic says you have to do something where you raise the cost. So what is it that you can do that is more painful on the Pakistani side without triggering a counterstrike? So in other words, let's say the Indians hit and they hit relatively hard, then the Pakistanis will hit back, and the Indians understand that. And you see this, in some of the more, if you will, sophisticated talk shows. Otherwise, Indian media is as jingoistic as the Pakistani, if not more. But the point is that you can see Indian analysts talking about this. That look, if you strike big, then they can strike back at you. And then, so where do we go? So are we then compelled to hit back again? In other words, how many rounds are we looking at before we end it, or this thing escalates out of control? So that is the fear right now. And I don't think, I mean, hey, if it happens like an hour after we record this, then I'm wrong. But the fact that it hasn't happened so far, and we're day 13, I'm pretty sure on the math about that. But if it hasn't happened so far, it means the Indians are trying to calibrate something that will be substantive, but not sort of break the norm, if you will. And so I don't have a model for you. And I can't sort of say, hey, this is what it's going to look like.
How do you rate the importance of the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty? Do you feel like that is a big deal, little deal, or no deal?
Well, that is a big deal because that treaty is from 1960. It was the World Bank got involved and basically played a role in getting that treaty off the ground. And the treaty has held. Yes, there's been noise made. In recent years, it's not working for Pakistan. There needs to be renegotiation. It's not working for India, so on and so forth. But it's held all throughout all the tensions, all the wars. I mean, 65 war, 71 war, 99 Kargil war, and then all the flashpoints that have occurred 2001, 2, 2008 Mumbai attacks, et cetera, et cetera. The Indians have never sort of said, hey, let's tamper with the Indus Waters Treaty. This is unprecedented. And obviously, this isn't like, okay, we're just going to stop the water of Pakistan. It's leverage. It's trying to gain leverage and to force Pakistan into a certain behavior. So the question is, will this lead to a renegotiation at some point when things calm down? Or is this something that's going to linger on and could actually become like a catalyst for more confrontation? Because the Pakistanis see this as, okay, and they've said it, this is like tantamount to a declaration of war. And so it's not really clear where they're going to go. I mean, there is the issue of, okay, are you going to build dams? And, can you tamper with the water supply? Do you really want to go there? What happens? And everybody's operating from sort of a worst case scenario. So this further makes this moment very different than everything we've seen in recent memory.
Yeah. If you were advising the Pakistani government, what would you tell them?
Oh, please. What can I say? That, I would basically say, look, there are always back channels, I'm told. This is what we've learned. There are always back channels. So go through one of them and sort of stop this from blowing up beyond what it already is. So can they do that? Can the Pakistanis actually say, okay, let me use my call? By the way, the Director General of Military Operations on both sides had their call a few days ago. The readout to the media was that this was about, keeping things calm on the LOC. The Indians told the Pakistanis stop firing or something like that. But there was a call, and that's an official call. So if there's an official call at a military level, then you would think that the back channels are easier to operate because they're secret, nobody knows about them. You can discuss things without having to go to the media. Maybe you can do something there. I don't know. I mean, I think we're significantly up an escalatory ladder that it becomes difficult to climb down, but not impossible. So I don't know. I mean, by all accounts, Pakistanis are bracing for incoming, and I don't know if anything can be done before that. I think that there is this round that perhaps has to happen. I never say that it's 100% inevitable, but I think where things are, we should be looking at some form of kinetic action and hoping that it'll remain confined within certain parameters from where you can go back to the negotiating table.
One underplayed part of this, I think, is the role of Bangladesh, and Bangladesh-India relations have not been great of late. Is there any opportunity for Pakistan to reach out to Bangladesh to try? I mean, I'm really stretching here. I'm just trying to think of worst case scenarios. But should India be worried about that? Is there a world in which India finds itself surrounded on both sides, or at least has two fronts going on? Like I'm really stretching, I know, but I'm just trying to get the sense of where Bangladesh is here.
No, you're not actually stretching. But I would sort of reframe the question and say, could there be some Chinese assistance to Pakistan in the case of some escalation? Bangladesh itself, yes, it's sort of the pro India government of the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is gone. And this new military led setup is definitely gravitating more towards China. That's very public. And there are significant, signs of a realignment with Pakistan. But what can they do? Do they want? They're in a transition themselves, and so they need to stabilize things on the home front. I don't think Bangladesh will get involved. The question is, what will the Chinese do? The reason I say that is because while the Chinese don't want to, see this thing get out of hand, but there is an interest here that if you're Chinese, if you're a Chinese strategic thinker and you're looking at this and saying, okay, this is the main ally of the U.S. and if it is bogged down in South Asia, then it can't be an ally to the U.S. So how do we get that going? I mean, there are risks involved. There's also the fact that since 2020, the Indians and the Chinese have sparred on their border. And since then, the Indians have been thinking about a two-front problem for themselves, both the line of control in Kashmir with Pakistan and the line of actual control, which runs from Kashmir all the way to the border with Myanmar, traversing through Nepal and Bhutan. It's a long border. And so from the Indian point of view, they have to factor in that if they go too big, then the Chinese could intervene in some shape or form. You, as a military strategist, you're sitting in New Delhi, it's not possible for you to ignore that, however remote it might be. Whatever calculus you do, that has to be factored in. Now, you may decide, we're not going to let it go that far, or we're prepared for it. Whatever the scenario is, they have to factor in the Chinese angle and the two-front war, because in this piece of geopolitical real estate, it's not just India and Pakistan. The Chinese are stakeholders as well. So there you have it.
What realistically do you think China's going to do, though? I would think that they wouldn't want any kind of conflict here.
They don't want any kind of conflict, but what they want is one thing, but what is it that they will be forced to do should an Indian, should India do something significant? Because this is their ally. Pakistan is their ally. Now there are problems between Pakistan and China, and many problems, but if you're aspiring to be great power and you're telling Pakistan that, hey, you didn't get much from the US, but if you align with us, it's about Chinese credibility as well. And so China can just sort of sit back and kind of say, oh, well, they're fighting again. They have to do something. Will they provide assistance of some form? I don't know. It's again, I think the ball is in the Indian court. Everything depends on what the Indians do. And this thing didn't play out in many rounds in 2019, but I'm sure the Chinese were watching that dogfight very closely between Indian and Pakistani warplanes, even if it was just for a couple of days. But it's not something that the Indians are kind of like, oh, it's happening in some remote corner. No, it's not. Here you have your ally and your biggest regional adversary, going at it. So you can't be sort of like neutral.
All right. Well, you're actually making me feel better, Kamran, because it sounds to me like all signs point towards de-escalation. So unless I'm reading you wrong, you have your choice from the menu. Would you like to talk Iran? Would you like to talk Israel and Gaza? Would you like to talk Yemen, Syria, Turkey? What is your pleasure?
I think that they're all part of a threat, a singular threat. We can talk about all of them and as part of a fabric that he called the Middle East. And it's not really in a good shape, but yeah, it's all part of the same logic.
Well, which part of the thread do you want to begin with? Do you want to begin with U.S.-Iran potential nuclear deal coming? Do you want to deal with
let's
the
start.
Houthis in Israel?
Let's start there and let's connect it to the Houthis, because today, just a short while ago, sitting with the Canadian Prime Minister, the president said that he's got word that the Houthis do not want to be bombed, and we will stop bombing them because they have promised to no longer attack ships. So that's a huge thing that just came out.
So no longer to attack ships. They're just going to bomb Tel Aviv airport, and President Trump's going to be cool with that?
And that's the wrinkle. And that is the question. And so I saw on Twitter somewhere that the report is that the Israelis were not taken into conference. They didn't know about this until they found out about this from the media. So it wasn't like there wasn't a discussion according to this report. And this report comes from Barak Ravid, who's a pretty legit journalist. He's high caliber. So I'm taking it seriously. And so I think that, look, we've had 3 rounds of conversations between the president's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and the Iranians. I think one of them, with the exception of one, all of the rounds have taken place in Oman. A 4th one is due this Sunday. I can't imagine they're just talking nukes. And I can't imagine that they're talking to the Iranians and then this Houthi thing comes out from nowhere. The Houthis are proxies of the Iranians. And this had to factor into the conversation, because this isn't just about nukes. This is about Iran's ability to, do ingress into the Arab world and destabilize it. And a key tool, especially after the massive hit that Hezbollah took last year and the collapse of the Assad regime, this is probably the sharpest tool or most potent tool in the Iranian arsenal. And therefore, you have to have a conversation on the Houthis. And the Houthis were being bombed, for many, many days consistently by by U.S. forces. And yesterday they struck at Tel Aviv airport. And then the Israelis conducted a strike. So you can't not talk. Those are not separate things. So if there is a deal that's happening, it's part of a broader conversation with the Iranians and saying, okay, while we're discussing nukes, we have to solve this. And so I think that there is an a conversation underway that is very serious. The big question about the Iranian nuclear negotiations is that is this just going to be a little more than JCPOA, the Obama nuclear deal? Uh, I have a hard time believing that. I don't think that this president can just sort of settle down on, okay, let's just put some bells and whistles on the same old deal and call it different. I think it's going to be substantively different, but and there is an opportunity to extract a bigger concession because of how desperate the Iranian situation is. They've lost the Levant. They're sort of like in defensive posture in Iraq. Their most lethal ally, the Houthis, are getting bombed. Their economy is in tatters. They're they're approaching a political transition, which will, in my view, is going to be a systemic transition. They need to sort this thing out. They need some sanctions respite before, the funeral procession of Khamenei is taken out. Because think about it: if you are the Iranian regime and the supreme leader has passed away, and obviously there's going to be a lot of public ceremony, if you will, for lack of a better term, public mourning. That's an opportunity for anybody who wants to come out and use that moment to do protests. And I've been told that they're really worried about that. So they want to be able to improve the public situation much sooner than that, before they get, they're deep into that position. And you can't sort of game this out because, someone somewhere in Tehran knows, what is the true status of the old man's health, but you have to assume that he's 86, and he's not going to be around for long. So whatever. So I don't know how much time they have, but the clock is ticking. So they have a situation where they need sanctions relief. They need a deal. What are they willing to give up? And I'm not saying they're going to just sort of say, hey, mothball our nuclear program and we're going to do like a Gaddafi in Libya 2003. No, they're not going to do that. But that's why I don't think it's just going to be JCPOA plus something. I think it's going to be a bit more substantive. Can we get a deal on the ballistic missiles? I don't know. I haven't seen a whole lot on it. But this thing from the president saying the Houthis are ready to call it quits and throw in the towel makes me hopeful that that there is some progression going on, that there will be something substantive. Now, how do you balance that with Saudi imperatives, Turkish imperatives, and Israeli imperatives? More importantly, that's the big key, because I think there are separate deals and arrangements taking place. I mean, just yesterday we had the news that the president came out and tweeted about how great his conversation was with the Turkish president Erdogan, and they talked about the Ukraine war, Gaza, Syria. So there's that thing happening. There's an Iranian conversation happening. There is also an understanding with Saudi. The president is about to go to Saudi on his first ever trip. And then there's Gaza. And I don't think, the U.S. ever wanted to take over Gaza. I think it was designed to put pressure on the Arab states to own the Palestinian issue. I think what's going on is the U.S., and this is where the Abraham Accord framework comes in, is that you guys need to sort this out, this Palestinian issue. We can't give you a two-state solution. It's not even possible, but it's not our problem. This is your problem. You need to own it. You've never owned it. You've always said the White House will do something and put pressure on Israel and bring it to the table. And at some point when, things are right, stars aligned, we're going to get a two-state solution. Well, that hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. That moment has come and gone, and it was a while back. So how do you move forward? You say, okay, they're going to get rid of Hamas. Now, Saudi Arabia, you need to work with UAE, Egypt, and Jordan to come up with a plan for a post-conflict Gaza. Because otherwise, the only other option is the Israelis have to occupy it, you know, indefinitely. And so I think that is being discussed behind the scenes. We have had some indication with proposals from the Egyptians and others that were neither here nor there about what their plan is. But I can't imagine that the the United States wants to pull back and is just going to let the Gaza thing fester. And so if you connect everything together, I think there are multiple deals in the making that are part of a broader strategy of the United States to keep this place from further deterioration, if that makes sense.
Sort of, but the strategy feels like how to get out of Dodge. I mean, isn't the idea to pull back completely so that you can focus on the South China Sea and other areas? Or do you think that the Trump administration is invested in having an American presence in the region for the long haul?
Ideally, I think they'd like to be able to withdraw. And because if you look at the grand strategy, and this isn't something that is just this White House's strategy. This has been in the making since the early days of the Obama administration, where the U.S. is saying, well, regional actors should take the lead, and we don't need to do the heavy lifting. No more boots on the ground. I mean, obviously, this was in the backdrop of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and the lessons learned from that. But I think what this White House has done is sort of said, Russia is not a problem for us. Russia could not conquer all of Ukraine. Europe is much more prosperous. Let them take the lead. We'll still be there. We're not doing the heavy lifting, but this is the reality for that theater. East Asia, you don't have a NATO, you don't have an EU equivalent. You have allies. You have South Koreans, the Japanese, the Philippines, the Taiwan and Australia and New Zealand, and you're trying to rope in India as well, in what is now called the Indo-Pacific. But you don't have an architecture, and it's maritime space. And I think what the United States is moving towards is we don't want to get involved in land conflicts, and we'll keep an eye on the oceans because we are, native to both the two big oceans, and that's part of our national security strategy. So we'll deal with that. And China, will also come at it through the tariffs and sort of the geoeconomic angle as well. And in the Middle East, the problem is you don't have you, you don't have you have a very fragile situation. You have regional actors, but their interests run, at cross purposes to one another. So the Saudis and the all things being equal, the Saudis and the Israelis should have cut a deal a long time ago before October 7th. But you can't have that or you couldn't have that before October 7th because they needed something, the Saudis, to say, hey, we haven't thrown the Palestinians under the bus to embrace Israel. They were talking about that when October 7th happened. October 7th completely blew everything out of the water. And now you have a situation where it's even more difficult. And so there's that. And this is sort of the most, if you will, friendly relationship or least hostile relationship between the Saudis and the Israelis. If you look at any other relationship, Turkey versus Israel in Syria, Turkey versus Iran, Iran versus Israel, Iran versus Saudi, they're all very adversarial. And so that region that we call Middle East is therefore not conducive in the current moment for the strategy of, well, let the regional actors, figure it out and we'll operate from behind the scenes. I think the US will continue to have to do some heavy lifting. Does that mean that it's going to be militarily involved heavily? No, it doesn't have to be. I'm not saying we're pulling the Fifth Fleet out of Bahrain. I'm just saying, the aircraft carriers will keep coming and going. The carrier strike groups, the facilities that exist will stay there. I mean, I think we're ready to sort of say, Syria seems to have a logic now, so we don't need to be there. Iraq, we don't want to be there. And so if we can reach something with the Iranians on that, and that's also part of the conversation with Iran, then maybe, these troops that are here and there, because those were placed because of the war against ISIS, that's over with. And so now you have a new dynamic. So can these players, can Israel and Turkey deconflict in Syria? Uh, do we need to be there to keep them apart? I don't think so, but we do need to be there diplomatic and use our sort of relationship, play referee. That doesn't require military presence. So that's sort of my thinking.
All right. Well, I mean, Kamran, I could talk to you forever, but let's get you out of here on this last question because we've sort of danced all around it and talked about everything that's around it. But the Assad regime fell only 6 months ago, and then we've had Israel being very aggressive on the Syrian border, seizing towns, things like that. We've had the Syrian Kurds basically give up some measure of their autonomy, their sovereignty, in order not to piss off the Turks and have the Turks rolling through. And otherwise, there was that first batch of violence after the fall of Assad, but Syria has seemed eerily quiet to me thus far. So, and in some ways, it is the linchpin of the entire region. So, get us out of here on thinking about Syria in the context of everything that you're talking about. It seems to be like the place where everybody is going to compete, but I'll let you have the final word on it.
So, Syria, from an Israeli point of view, is the northern flank. You now have the makings of a state that is Sunni Islamist, if you will, and so that's not good from an Israeli perspective. Israel has not had to deal with strong states in the Arab world for a very long time. Egypt was taken off the board with the Camp David Accords. Syria was weak, and Lebanon was a mess, and the Iranians were playing there, and there was sort of this unstated, if you will, understanding with the Assad regime that, hey, we don't want you gone. You don't want to piss us off. Just keep Hezbollah in check. That continued until the Arab Spring uprising, when the Assad regime went from actually being dominant in the Levant, became dependent on Iran and Hezbollah for its own survival. So that threw out that prior, if you will, arrangement. Jordan has always had sort of an unstated understanding with Israel. Syria is now changing. There's going to be a new Syria, and you don't know where it's going. And it has a big backer called Turkey. So in many ways, pushing Iran out of the Levant has had an unintended consequence of Turkey becoming the dominant power there. So I think what's going to happen in Syria is what the Israelis and the Turks agree on or disagree on. So I think that that's where it is. As far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, I think that they will have to find a way to work, and I think they already are. You can see it from the fact that the new Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, his first visit outside his country after becoming president was to Saudi Arabia. And so I think there's an understanding between the Saudis and the Turks as to where to go. But the Saudis are an economic power. They're not a military power. The Turks are a military power. And they have aspirations in the full classic sense of being a great power. So how does that work with Israel? Can they reach a modus vivendi for the short term? Those are things that we should be watching. And yes, Syria is going to be important. But I still think that the Saudis have to figure out the Palestinian issue in order for them to be at ease. They can't, the Saudis wish that there wasn't this problem that they have to deal with. I mean, they're probably very, very annoyed that the United States is not taking ownership of this issue and sort of saying, you deal with it. So, but this is a new reality that they will have to adjust to.
Yeah, I don't think there are many things in the world I'm more cynical about than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I mean, it seems to me that the Israelis will do whatever they're going to do with Gaza, and that the rest of the Middle East will, I don't know, pay lip service to it, but that nobody's really going to care. But maybe that's too cynical of me. All of these conflicts, Israel, Palestine, Kashmir between India and Pakistan, like it's just like, I mean, we'll probably be here in 10 years speaking about the very same issues, don't you think?
Hopefully not. I wanted to end on an optimistic note.
If you have one, please share it. But it's hard to find. I mean, I guess the optimistic note is that we are probably going to get an Iran-U.S. deal of some sort. It does seem like that is the future of that. And if the Olympians are not busy crashing against each other, then maybe the smaller countries and smaller peoples in between them aren't going to get crushed. But as for the proximate conflicts themselves, it's pretty hard to be optimistic. No,
it is hard to be optimistic. It's just that, I mean, I feel like people have to get tired of nonsense for so long, and I remain optimistic about the human averseness to suffering, but then again, there's the other part of the human condition which is called the propensity to conflict. So we'll see. I just hope we're not talking about these things in 10 years.
Yeah,
I hope we're talking about different things, have different problems.
Yeah, I hope we're talking about how Saudi Arabia has transformed into a liberal democracy in the middle of the desert, and NEOM is doing everything, and everything is fine. But I don't know. That feels like
intelligence is running the place.
All right. Thanks, Kamran. It's always great to see you.
All right. Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening to the Jacob Shapiro podcast. The show is produced and edited by Jacob Smulian, and it's in many ways the Jacob Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, or leave a review. It takes just a couple seconds of your time, but it really helps us. Also share with a friend. If you're interested in learning more about hiring me to speak at your event, or if you want to learn more about the wealth management services that I offer through Bespoke or at Cognitive Investments, you can find more information at jacobshapiro.com. You can also write to me directly at jacob@jacobshapiro.com. I'm also on X for now with the handle Jacob Shap. That's Jacob, SHAP, no dats, dashes, or anything else, but I'm not hard to find. See you out there.